Even though that content, that dish, that meal might be personalized for you, that doesn't mean that you're actually going to apply it or retain it without the help of others. It could be very, very relevant, applicable. My dietary needs of 2,000 learning calories a day have been fulfilled by this thing that's personalized for me. Gotcha. I don't want 2,001 learning calories and I don't want 1,999 learning calories. I want it to be specific just for me. So I received it, for lack of better words. That doesn't mean that I can apply it well unless I have the opportunity to ideally discuss or work or at least observe someone that has applied it very, very well. So the personalization push of content doesn't essentially mean that it's going to stick. Because I think
you got to digest it.
You got to digest it. Hopefully there's no Pepto-Bismol. I'm a total big believer, and there's a lot of science behind this. People work best if there's someone else that's learning with them.
Well, Mark, it's really great to have you. It's been just a pleasure being able to get to know you, learn from your work, on your thinking on learning. You're just such a expert in the field with a wealth of experience in both on the internal L&D side and as a vendor side and so on. And so thank you for joining here, and really excited to dive in a bit.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invite, Vince. I'm really looking forward to the chat.
Awesome. Yeah. So why don't we dive right in? One of the things that I really appreciate about my conversations with you is that you really take things to kind of a granular level rather than stay kind of at the high level of, AI and learning and things like that. So I want to kind of dig in and get your thoughts. Maybe let's start by first asking, okay, when you think of AI and corporate learning, what do you think are the biggest, let's say 2 biggest opportunities there? And then I'm going to ask you about enablers afterwards.
Yeah, it's a big question. It's an important question. It's a broad and wide, detailed and non-detailed question, or at least the type of responses. There's a lot of ways to kind of look at this at a high level, Vince. I tend to use a lot of metaphors, and I grew up in restaurants. So here's a restaurant metaphor for us. The way I kind of think about AI for L&D is I'm thinking about restaurants. There's all the activities and action that happen in the kitchen, right behind the scenes. So this is where you have the ingredients. This is where you have the recipes. This is where you have the pots and pans. This is where you think about the different channels of distribution, right? Is it going to go to the drive-through window? So have to be prepared for that. Is it going to be for white linen service, whatever? But there's all these activities that happen behind the scenes. And then, pushing the restaurant metaphor a little bit, there's all the stuff that happens in the dining room. So this is, user facing or learner facing. This is where the learner or the user or the employee, right? They have a certain set menu of expectations. I need this. It's got to taste like that. It's got to be fast, or I want 4 different, courses of X, Y, Z. And so the way I kind of frame AI for learning is primarily in those 2 buckets. There's all the activities, the operational mechanisms of faster production, creation, data, the impact on skills to make sure that AI and AI agents that we can talk about, that they are able to understand the individual person in the dining room, their dietary or skill preferences or needs, and then ideally be able to understand that and then shape the right content or the right dish or the right meal for that individual. But those are the things that happen behind the scenes in the AI for L&D kitchen. In terms of the AI and L&D dining room, whether it's persona-based journeys, right? So here's this role, you're an engineer, here's the path you should take, or whether it's something unique to a certain domain like leaders and leadership training, or all the stuff in the middle. You have a certain set of expectations that you have. And interestingly, there's a lot of parallels related to what a customer might have in a real dining room. I want convenience. So what does that mean? It's got to be speedy. It's got to be just right for me. And ideally, it's in the right contextual need. It's got to be healthy. So by that, I mean, Give me something that is going to help me grow, but grow in unique ways that are just for me. An example might be is, you know what? And I don't want to talk about learning styles. That in itself is a hot topic. But if someone just likes to watch a whole bunch of YouTube videos, because that's just the way that they actually learn better and faster, versus somebody who they want to talk to the maitre d or the captain or the server in their dining room, and they want that one-on-one kind of support and service or mentoring and coaching. So at a high level, those are the way I kind of think about it. And you were talking about details. Maybe I was giving you too shallow of details. I don't know.
No, we can dive in. We can dive in there. By the way, I love the metaphor, and actually, I could totally imagine us pushing on that metaphor and really surfacing interesting way of thinking about it. But let's actually go to the kitchen first.
Okay.
We're
hungry.
Yeah, let's go to the kitchen. I'm a terrible cook, so I'm gonna be out of my element here. But one of the things that I feel like you need in a kitchen to be successful is you need the ingredients and the equipment and the tools in the right way, so you can actually whip up the right dish, right? What do you think are some of those ingredients or setups that are required in a corporate environment that maybe don't exist yet, or things need to be looked at differently for AI to actually support? So, for example, like, let me give you an example, but you can take this however you want. There's been a ton of conversation about skills-based organizations. Like, what does that mean? How do we make organizations be much more focused on skills? I think there seems to be some really strong interplay that will happen between AI and skills and so on. Nobody really knows exactly how it will play out, but I would love to hear your perspective on what is required for AI to actually have the impact that it can have in the kitchen.
Yeah. Just to kind of step back for a second, because I love the way you kind of framed, there's ingredients. So at a high level, the ingredients that an AI L&D instructional design chef might have, the ingredients could just be the content, right? The different forms and types and varieties and flavors and intensities of content. That's like the ingredients piece in the kitchen. The other one is the tools. So in a literal kitchen, it's pots and pans and spatulas and whatever. But I think when you're looking at this from an AI for L&D construct, the tools are the systems, the protocols, the governance, because it might not be technology related and so forth. And then there's also the method, right? So the ingredients, the tools, and the method. And the method is the recipes or the recipe book. What are we going to follow to make sure that we've got the right recipe for the vegan learner. In this case, let's just assume the vegan learner just wants to go straight to the test, right? I don't care about the fluffy content. It might taste good. I'm already an expert. Give me the dang test and I want to fly. But at a high level, that's the way I kind of look at the construct, the different pieces, the dimensions in the AI for L&D kitchen. I think it's interesting if you were to really kind of double down just on the ingredients piece. There's the content, but what shapes and forms the content? So if you really want to push the metaphor, right? Is it organic, right? Is it coming from, in this construct or this example, organic basically means there's a higher level of quality and integrity. So a good way to look at that is this actually comes from real people, real experts. Or maybe there's real data that validates the purity and the integrity of that chunk of content. And by the way, that chunk of content still needs to be shaped and groomed and so forth. If you've got like a bag of peanuts that need to be shelled, there's still some mechanism to kind of get to the actual ingredients, the peanuts. I know we're pushing this, but anyway, my point is we can also think about skills as part of the ingredients as well. So by that, I mean, if there's a certain skill need, I'll just make up something just very generic. Say you need to learn Perl or CSS or some sort of programming language or something like that. That's a very specific need. And ideally for this type of engineer-based training, part of this skill wrapper around the content or the ingredients for engineering, and then using this example, I need to practice I need to go in and I need to build code. I need to test the code. I need something or someone to evaluate the accuracy and the purity and the relevance of the code and so forth. Can AI help accelerate how that is bundled, how the content is bundled? Absolutely. I think the using the ingredients example that you mentioned, Vince, it can help shape the right type of guidance, instruction, levels of practice for that individual. If the guy or gal has been programming in really difficult languages and now is like a superstar with AI and so forth, does he or she really need all the fundamental basics? No,
Mm.
but I think AI can help personalize or tailor. Because I think those are two different things actually, and I think they're constantly, unfortunately, merged, which is I think is not correct. But if AI can help basically personalize that information just for you, Vince, because it knows now talking to other systems, technically, or I'm sorry, in terms of your role, you're a sales guy and you're supporting this part of the business, which primarily supports financial services. And you are aligned to formal salespeople with quota, and you must follow a certain phased methodology that the salespeople follow. So I'm just basically saying, if it knows that level of detail, it can probably prescribe or personalize or tailor the right chunk of ingredients or information for you. But that's the way I kind of think about it. We could talk about the tools and the methods as well, pushing the kitchen metaphor. But that was a really good question.
Interesting. Yeah. So as you think about the like the personalization piece, I think you're now getting to how well both there's things like of preparing the right stuff, but it needs to be delivered in the right way for the actual user. And then where do you are you thinking that actually the bigger opportunity lies in AI being able to have a better impact on the user side? Like the kitchen side seems a lot of it efficiency and faster preparation of better food. But then actually on the delivery side, I feel like there's a lot of opportunities for things to evolve. I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, if we move, if we go through the double door, as they
Yeah.
say in
Yeah.
restaurant language, if you move through the double door
Yeah.
from the kitchen into the dining room, the first things that come to mind, at least for me, Vince, is, and it's actually tied to what you do in a Sparkwise learning journey perspective, right? Tailoring it, customizing it, but have AI help guide, not control, or not maybe even teach. Just kind of give you that guidance along the way. My point here is, I find it really fascinating the way that the use of AI can certainly personalize, but what does that experience, what does that journey really look like for me? If we were to get really high level pushing the metaphor, in the end, the benefits of AI and L&D in the behind the scenes is the operational efficiencies and cost and time savings and creativity and so forth. I get it. And then in the front of the house, it is literally, how can AI provide a better learning experience for that individual? And there's a lot of give and take, right? One feeds the other and back and forth. If it's personalization and a personalized journey, hey, it's just for Mark, it's just for Vince. Well, that's got to be built and constructed in such a way where some sort of data about Mark or Vince is informing the sous chefs in the kitchen about how to tailor the right learning journey for me. Give me small stuff first. Give me an ability to practice second. Give me some understanding or ability for me to kind of really recognize and understand that what I've just learned actually means this or this or this to me. There's this whole aspect of constructivist learning design and so forth, where the individual, the learner, can construct, or they're adding something to the actual learning process. But can it really kind of dive into there and extract out what's going to be unique? I think it's really fascinating in terms of that ability to really not just personalize or tailor the content, but one huge opportunity which has already taken place, and this has actually started in the old machine learning days, is this whole idea about adaptive learning. Adaptive learning is a little different than personalized. Personalized means, hey, it kind of knows who you are as a person, a role, a worker, what function do you work? Okay, let me give it to you that way. Tailoring basically means, you need 5 minutes of 7 modules versus, a 35-minute, dump of stuff or whatever, right? It's tailoring, right? What's really interesting about the adaptive piece, and I'm really excited about this, but I'm going to cut this short because I'm probably talking too much. What's really exciting about the adaptive piece is if I'm a salesperson and I am selling to the energy sector or something like that, but I've been doing this for a long time, but there's a new form of energy or whatever that new vehicle might be, or that new vehicle might be, and I need to know that, just that little chunk. So everyone else that takes this program to learn about this new kind of technology, they all have to take, I'm just making up these numbers, 40 hours of X. Well, if I already know half the stuff, for lack of better words, why are you giving me 40
Right.
hours? Give me half. Give me the 20. But then it becomes actually problematic. What are you going to do? Let's just say there's 41-hour modules. Oh, well, those just give you 20 modules. Well, sure, but that's not the point. I need to know a little bit of every module, but then again, there's a lot of stuff in every module I already know. So how is the content going to adapt to Vince's needs?
Yeah.
And then what's the process to assess what they think they know, therefore I don't need to teach you, or what they think they don't know, therefore I need to give it to you. Then there's the stuff in the middle. Here's the stuff that I'm confident I know, but if I'm giving that one assessment to validate my confidence and I blow it, guess what? You thought you were an expert, but you're not. So the process to adapt the content towards that unique need is something totally in AI's bailiwick. And I think that's another fantastic opportunity, in addition to the personalization and the tailoring and the adaptive piece.
Yeah, I really like sort of these power of AI to be able to fit the individual. I'm going to ask a question that's a little bit sort of counter, like majority view. I'd be very curious of what you think.
Yep.
So one of the things that I kind of struggle with is how much people talk about personalization and that being a nirvana of learning.
Yeah.
And so what I would actually say is, even in a restaurant, if we go back to the metaphor, of course, like you have your own preferences and you want like meat. Some people want vegetables, like they want to be able to pick their dish. But people don't want to eat alone in a restaurant, right? Like that's rare. That's a specific circumstance. If you think about a great learning experience, it's rarely solitary. And I feel like there's confusion of what personalization means to becoming, okay, everybody's on their own and like somehow AI gives you the perfect content and somehow people are going to have fun doing it. And my general skepticism is like, nobody wants to learn like that. Like adults like don't want to sit there alone, like looking at content for most of the time, unless they have some real motivation to spend learning because it's tied to their performance or tied to their comp or something.
Yeah.
And so I really struggle a little bit with how far people tend to push the sort of argument of personalization and it actually worsening the learning experience for humans. But I'm kind of curious, like how you feel about it, and how we should reconcile the push for personalization and like individualized learning to actually how humans seem to learn best.
That's a really good question, and it is pretty provocative. I don't know if I have a good answer. I guess the way I'd look at it is, even though that content, that dish, that meal might be personalized for you, that doesn't mean that you're actually going to apply it or retain it without the help of others. And it could be very, very relevant, applicable. My dietary needs of 2,000 learning calories a day have been fulfilled by this thing that's personalized for me. Gotcha. I don't want 2001 learning calories, and I don't want 1,999 learning calories. I want it to be specific just for me. I got it. So I received it, for lack of better words. That doesn't mean that I can apply it well unless I have the opportunity to ideally discuss or work or interact or at least observe someone that has applied it very, very well.
Mm.
So the personalization push of content doesn't essentially mean that it's going to stick, because I think
you got to digest it.
You gotta digest it. Hopefully there's no Pepto-Bismol. For folks outside the U.S., it's a digestive thing. But anyway, probably not the best word choice. But it's really interesting. I'm a total big believer that, and there's a lot of science behind this. People work best if there's someone else that's learning with them. I didn't say a facilitator. Of course that helps. Or teacher. Of course that helps. Mentor, coach. Of course. But if you can experience what you've been personally receiving, so Mark personally receives this, Vince personally receives that, Johnny or Mary or Jane personally receives their stuff. Gotcha. But we're all taking the same course. So how do we find the way to take the stuff that's unique to me or for me, but still work with others to make sure that it's deployable as a team, applicable as a unit, supporting broader goals that we all have, because maybe we all work at the same function. I don't know. But there's that element. Now, I'm not saying it's always the human element. Maybe it's a humane element. But I think there's always that element where if you really, really want to reach the absolute holy grail of effective learning, it's how do you apply it? It's one thing, and I write about this with all my the task stuff that I've been writing about, but it's one thing or let me just ask you, Vince, what would you rather have? What do you think is more important? Do you think it's more important to complete a task successfully, or to obtain a new skill but never apply it?
Definitely the former.
And so that's kind of my point, whether it's a task or a skill, and we can talk about that. At the end of the day, really, particularly if the company is paying for your education, which ideally all companies should be, but it's still for a business purpose, and ideally it's for a productivity purpose, and ideally it's for a personal career purpose as well. But that's how I kind of think about it, because it is that kind of that nice marriage. The question is, how can AI and all its siblings, large language models, GPTs, agents, whatever, how can they help both ends, right? The provisioning of that's unique to me, but the collaboration of, or the unity of, or the combination of with others that might have the same interests. And then you can hold out dynamics of, well, I'm in my role for 3 years. This person's been in the same role for 10 years, and this person just started last week. Well, you get that really interesting harmony effect to help each other.
Yeah.
So there's the inbound personalized, but there's still, I think, that you need, and there's a lot of, again, good science that kind of backs this up. People learn better with others.
Yeah.
And the thing is, one last point too, what's really interesting is, we talked a lot about, constructivist theories, the ability for the learner to construct elements of the actual, learning or learning process or training process, whatever. I think what's really interesting too is there's that aspect, but where does challenge fit in? I bet you that you're probably going to learn deeper, faster, more robust, whatever, if you're challenged appropriately.
Yes.
And I think if we're challenged appropriately by other humans, or I don't know if you're familiar with the Socratic style of learning agents, but basically guiding you, but giving you those little challenges and those really tough questions along the way. That's supremely powerful. And that might not be in the provisioned, personalized content for me, but that's in the actual activity that we need to go through to grow.
Yeah, I really sort of like the distinction you made around provisioning of specific things you just need to know versus then you have to take it and be able to use it. And that's a different sort of capability.
Yeah.
And the one thing I want to hit on, and that you said that really resonated, and then I would love to actually hear your thoughts on tasks and skills, because I know you've been writing about it, is I think in most organizations, you are driving learning because you want to elevate performance and culture of the organization. Learning is not an end, right? It's like a means to an end. And an organization is necessarily a collection of people who are like trying to get somewhere together. And when we push the argument of personalization so far, I'm just thinking like, okay, you're just trying to build everyone into, I don't know, top athletes, but that's not how a great team gets formed, right? Like it's actually more about the collective performance, not like individually people just getting better on like discrete stuff.
Yeah.
And the idea of how do you elevate people together, like I think seems to just kind of get lost in the conversation. And generally I've seen technology do that. Like, social media, any sort of technology seems to really drive and empower the individual, but at the cost of losing community. And it feels like this is heading in a similar direction. So therefore, anyways, what you said resonated in short. Okay, great. So I wanted to talk a little bit about tasks and skills. Generally, I know you have written a lot and have a lot of thoughts on, well, what is skills-based organization? And how do we think about tasks versus skills? And how does AI fit into that? So maybe I would ask a first kind of a question to you. How do you define skills-based organization? Why does it matter? And what do you think are people kind of getting it right or wrong when they talk about it?
Yeah, it's another, I think, hot topic, and I don't want it to be a contentious topic. Skills at the end of the day, and how skills are strategically organized, provisioned, tracked, whatever, or skills-based organizations, that's vital. It's important. It's critical. It is core. It is centered to the survival of the company, let alone the individuals, the collective and the individuals. Skills is paramount. It's non-negotiable. I think what's kind of happening, which is why I put together this series, is there's been, I think, kind of an imbalance, a lack of proportion, where I think the many enterprises, many learning teams, many talent teams, many human resource teams, they're getting like this saturation, this loud, visceral, noise to a certain degree about skills. Absolutely. Again, it is critical. It is a non-negotiable. But I think there's been, over the past few years, I think a little bit of an imbalance where it's all or nothing, so to speak. I'm being a little dramatic when I say that, about skills. And that's why, I wrote a recent series on this, in the sense of, I get it. Again, no argument. Skills, number one, absolutely. But what powers a skill, right? What really makes that skill applicable? And then you can talk about the AI piece, right? The way I kind of look at why tasks should be proportionally balanced with skills. There's a few kind of perspectives or measurements, or I was going to say Mark's mantra about tasks, but let's not go there. I think what's really interesting is, tasks at a task level focus is far more definitive and measurable with accuracy. So tasks are far more binary than a skill. One can say that tasks are more quantitative and skills are more qualitative, and skills are very context dependent. But just hold on a second. Just strictly from a business perspective, right? Which one can I measure with greater accuracy? And I think task in this context, they're binary. Did Vince successfully complete that task or not? And I realize there's a little bit of grayness, there's some variables, 95% is better than 94%, whatever, I get it. But that's just one thing. It's from a business lens perspective, which one of those, and they both drive performance and productivity and even happiness to a certain degree, but which one of those can I measure with accuracy? It's probably going to be the task. Another one is when you're trying to solve a business problem or a personal problem, depending. But when you're trying to solve that problem, what's that level of nitty gritty you want to get to make sure that you're solving it correctly? I want to know specifically the step, the process, the action, the specific thing that fell through the cracks. The skill might not fall through the cracks because this skill definition says, oh, well, we made it through. And that skill definition says, oh my gosh, it fell so far through the cracks. There's like this ambiguity, I think, in many cases. And a lot of the big skill taxonomy providers are making it more confusing because there's no like true open source definition. Well, there kind of is, but there's no true open source definition on the skill itself. But my point here is, which one of these are you going to double down on to accurately identify what's going on with that problem or that opportunity? I think there's a lot of other aspects. I think skills, and I think this is part of the confusion and maybe some of the lack of uptake for skills-based organizations. Skills are still fairly, theoretical and abstract. They do depend on the context. They depend on the use case. They depend on the objectivity of the individual or the agent that's measuring the impact or the obtainment. Again, just because you obtained a skill doesn't mean that you actually do anything with it.
Right.
You might be able to do something with it really, really well if you have that opportunity, but in many cases they don't. I think tasks provide a far more concrete set of evidence. And I think task and also is really interesting in the sense of when you start thinking about which one is AI's best friend forever. Is it the skill or is it the task? And my argument is because tasks are more binary, because tasks are more quantifiable, because tasks therefore are much more measurable. The machine, whether it's a good agent or a complicated agent or an easy agent or the orchestrator agent over all the other agents, they want a binary understanding of what's going on. So I think in many cases when we're talking about tasks and skills and AI, that's the way I kind of look at it. Good, bad, right, or wrong. But when you think about this as an opportunity from an L&D lens, just my last point, I think it's really super fascinating. There's this whole focus on, ETL, extract, transform, loads. How do you extract all the right enterprise data or information, right? How do you then structure it using knowledge graphs? We can talk about that. And then how do you organize it and position it and tag it and rearrange it just unique for the business? So my point here is one of the articles that I write on, it's wonderfully titled, Let Learning Breathe. And the whole idea here is training traditionally has been in a container. It's in a container of duration. It's in a container of scope. It's in a container of reach. It's in a container of learning objectives. It's in a container for, well, this is just for engineers. Sorry, it's not for salespeople or whatever. When we're thinking about AI's ability to tap into all of the mostly unstructured data in the enterprise, emails, PowerPoint decks, live conversations in Slack or Teams, whatever that might be, and to tap into that and then to understand the value, we can talk about that in terms of that particular informational asset or instructional asset. We have a whole new ocean of phenomenal content or ingredients to provision for our teams. Do we have to buy it from the big, library vendors? If there's any library vendors on this webinar, I'm just giving an opinion. But do we have to actually spend all that money when the stuff, for the most part, already exists in our enterprise? But it's not tagged correctly, it's unstructured, it's hard to find, Well, guess what? that's where a lot of the ETL technologies, knowledge graphs, and so forth, they're actually starting to identify that. So my point here is, it's going to be so phenomenal. I don't know when this is going to happen. I think it's already happening. If we can let learning breathe, because good learning, it's constantly alive. It is like a really, really good bottle of wine, right? It's sitting there in its wonderful bottle. Maybe it's aging, maybe it's doing whatever. But once it's uncorked for the human or the consumer or the learner, the humidity, the oxygen, it changes the environment.
Interesting.
And if we can release a good course in the same way that a good uncorked bottle of wine might be breathing based on certain circumstances, wow, let's remove the container. If we can remove that container and just let learning breathe, that's supremely powerful. And I don't think we're that far away. There's a lot of different, constructs here, right? Is it tied to the right, workflow? Is it assigned to work to begin with? Is it personalized for whomever? I get it. But just getting, access to the right content, and then making sure that content, guess what? You and I and our teams, we're in teams every day. We're writing emails every day, PowerPoint docs, slides, whatever. And if it's under the enterprise legal control, which most of the stuff typically is, why not release it? Why not uncork it? And I think that's something that could be, I think that's right around the corner. The last thing I'll say is, you were talking beforehand about, the volume scale. The number one thing that kind of bothers me right now related to current state L&D offerings, it's this voracious appetite, consumer-driven appetite for a heck of a lot of content. If I'm going to have a skills library, I'm not going to have 13 skills. I'm going to have 1,300 skills. And part of the problem here is we've been so fascinated as L&D teams and leaders and learning strategists to always think about scale, the economies of scale. Let's get scale. I get it. There's no argument. You got to get scale. But part of the problem with today's construct, whether it's from vendors or internally, is we can't be in a position where all we're doing is providing bulk learning as a commodity. It's bulk. Why is it bulk? Because it has to attain a lowest common denominator for as many people as possible. So we got to stop with bulk boxed provisioning of learning, because all we're doing at the end of the day is, bulk learning leads to average workers at scale. Is that what we really want? Well, I hate to say it. I haven't seen anything otherwise, but if you're really going to think about scale, you got to dummy it down, pardon me, because you got to think about the lowest common denominator or the medium common denominator. But at the end of the day, if everybody's taking the same bulk stuff, you're just building a whole bunch of average learners or average workers. So that's one of the really, really big supreme benefits and dangerous things I think is going to turn the whole content business upside down, which is already happening.
It's really fascinating. There's a lot of things to unpack. Let me first start by this idea of letting learning breathe. And I'm going to try to also ask kind of a not quite contrarian, but I'm curious how you think about this. One of the things I have noticed is that people, at least when I engage with different learners through Sparkwise or I've seen elsewhere, like in my prior life, one of the things that people seem to really like is looking at learning as a series of sprints rather than this ongoing marathon that's never ending. That actually learning, the desire to learn and the mindset around, I'm here to improve, requires a certain level of motivation, because it's more of a long-term thinking kind of development, at least some types of learning. And people like feeling like there's a start and an end to this program, rather than it's like constantly never ending. I am engaged in this, and actually that start and end heightens the motivation to like focus and try to learn
Oh, I see. I
and
see.
apply. Right. So it's
So you're saying
actually,
that if you're saying, I don't mean to interrupt, but if you're saying if there is kind of a target endpoint,
yeah,
if I can see where the end of the 100-meter dash is, I'm going to sprint like hell in the
that's
next
right.
2 hours to get it done to a certain level of efficacy or completeness or something like that.
Yeah. So there's like, when you tie to motivation and how engaged you are, the feature of there's a start and end seems to play a role because it provides a certain like concrete goal. Now, I think there are, depending on the type of learning you're doing, I think there are, sometimes you don't need this, and to your point, learning needs to breathe. But there are other times where I think the container actually creates extra reason why people are suddenly excited. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
how do you think about sort of that?
Well, I,
As
I, I actually agree with you big time. I mean, just because it's breathing doesn't mean that you can't stop and take a break, right? I
yeah,
mean, it's at some point. Well, the way I kind of look at it is, this is a very, very hot topic, and I'm probably going to totally mess this up in terms of how I explain it. There's like two forms of learning,
mm,
in a corporate learning environment. There's the stuff I need to learn to help me be productive and do my job well, and that stuff typically happens, possibly or ideally, while you're working or adjacent to your
mm-hmm,
work. Gotcha. Then there's this stuff over here that has the same level of durability, so to speak. But you know what? If I am new to people management and it really scares the heck out of me because I don't want to mess up other people's
yeah,
livelihood and lives and career, I want to do a darn good job as a good manager, man. Well, okay, here's the 4 week series, and it's basically 4 parts, and each week is you focus on blah blah blah. So that has certain, fixed kind of objectives, and call it container, call it box, whatever. But it actually allows someone to have that certain targeted, um, implied and motivated, not implied, that certain level of motivation. Actually, I'm going to hit that target every dang Friday. And
it's
by the way, every Friday I have to stand up and I have to give a verbal performance of what I've learned. All right. So maybe the peer pressure's on, right? And all the other kind of instructional, constructs you can kind of think about. Absolutely. I love that. Those are my two kind of buckets at a super high level, because it's interesting getting back to your point. In the first example where I need to learn or be trained or be certified, whatever, on how to do XYZ aspects of my job correctly. For me, that's the famous in the flow of, right? How am I given and provisioned, and what's my appetite? Just receive that little chunk. If I'm working on the assembly line, I'm building BMW motorcycles or something, right? And I'm in, section Z of that. And I've got in section Z, you got to do 16 tasks. Okay. Well, why the heck is everybody always messing up on task number 9 in section Z? Well, is it a skill thing? Yeah, it might be. Is it a task thing? Probably. But you know what? Just give me that little bit of insight so I can go from task 9 to task 10 successfully. Am I like learning and in this really, trained, interactive and highly engaging environment? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe there's a dozen other people that get stuck on step 9. But my point is that's in the flow of the work itself. And that to me is how I define that more, lifelong learning, pardon me. But I need to continually get better at my job. Just give me the little chunk. Give me that little chunk. By the way, the chunk doesn't have to be instructional. The chunk could just be informational.
mm-hmm,
Oh, step 9. Dang it. I didn't know I was supposed to check this box.
mm,
Is there a skill to check the box? No, but everybody forgets to check the box. Why? Because the UI designer put the dang box at the bottom of the fold and you never really see it. Okay. But anyway, that's that type. There's the type that I think is far more formidable. They both have levels of durability, for lack of better words, but I think this one's far more formidable because now you're actually talking about the importance of SBOs and skills and so forth. And if you're trained on the right task to attain that skill, that's cool too. And then there's stuff in the middle. right?
Yeah.
How am I going to be a phenomenal supervisor over Section Z and the Section Z teams? That's a little interesting as well. But I totally hear what you're saying. I think, it's nice to have a goal.
Yeah. It's interesting, like, as you chat through these two flavors, it actually made me visualize a spectrum, and like there are two different axes that I could map this to. The first axis actually, we call it learning and development, like probably for a reason. Like the first bucket, you seem to be much more about learning, and the second bucket seems to be much more about development, like vertical development and actually improving as a person. Or it could also be more like knowledge versus skill. The first one feels much more like tactical knowledge you just got to do. And the more you go into this sort of deeper learning you're talking about, it actually turns into skill acquisition where you got to, and it's tied to something more, less just like tactfully, like tactically, I got to do this on my job versus, I actually need to improve my capability, right? Which I think just requires more higher level of motivation because they're usually longer term, and not necessarily immediately tied to like me getting this report done. And for you to have muster the motivation to put in the effort when you don't have the deliverable you literally have to do right now, you need additional things that are tied to human motivation to like get the person to show up and be excited and put in the time versus something else they could be doing.
That's really good. I mean, there's the intrinsic side of motivation and the extrinsic side. I've been actually thinking about which one is friendlier to our good friend AI. Intrinsic motivation for learners or extrinsic motivation for learners. And I think it's far more extrinsic. The extrinsic motivators are usually coming from the company or whatever, right? And then the company will therefore have power from a measurable standpoint to determine whether or not you're growing, you're succeeding, you're developing, whatever. I think it's a really, really fascinating topic. I'd actually push it back to you to a certain degree. I mean, you have a wonderful, wonderful high growth company that's really fitting some really interesting niches. Everybody's familiar with at scale collaborative online learning, but then when you throw in an efficiency and efficacy construct of agents along the way to guide, that's kind of like intrinsic and extrinsic to a certain degree. Is the agent more of your extrinsic guide?
Yeah, right now I would say the core of our platform, I think we've definitely anchored around more the intrinsic motivation of humans, right? And so what I think what we've grappled a lot with, because of the nature of the things we teach that are more on the second half of the L&D that you talked about, we do less of like tactically in step 3, you gotta
Yep.
So we focus a lot on what makes people want to learn and really engage to learn at their max. And so our platform is really designed around that. Now, I think we're starting to add different components with AI to support that journey. But yeah, I think you're right that actually a lot of the AI stuff that I'm seeing right now plays much stronger to the former, the more tactical learning that on the job in the flow of work as a performance support, not as a deeper development. And I think there's general question about, in the world where agents are running more and more of operations and actually automating a lot of the more basic work, how do companies develop their people to get to the point where they're like experts inside the company and can manage teams if like none of the work that they are doing today to get there is available for people to do as an analyst? It's kind of I guess a lot of people I think are thinking about that. But anyways, yeah, for us, we've always thought intrinsic first as a learning company.
Yeah.
That's why we actually don't do gamification as much.
Oh boy.
We're pretty opinionated in saying like gamification to me it really taps into a lot of extrinsic, and where we thought about our platform first is we're gonna first make the learning experience itself like something that's very motivating.
Yeah.
And definitely could imagine adding more things down the line to sort of round it out. but we want people to want to show up and not because they want to get the next badge necessarily. And that's a trade-off we made as an early stage company in saying like, do we want to be distinctive in our product?
Yeah.
That probably also it could be quite provocative, depending on which you're talking to.
There's a lot to unpack on that one. It's the whole gamification piece in AI is just really, really fascinating too. If you can, what if you can literally do your gaming in real time? So all the students are typically competing in real time. Now that happens in many gamification platforms. All right. But what if the leaderboard and the scoring mechanisms and the value of a certain point on the leaderboard, it toggles up and down based on complexity that everybody thought was easy, but it's not far more complicated. AI can basically say, wow, all students failed on questions 3, 4, and 5 because they're all about this topic, but all students said they were highly, highly confident that they knew the stuff in questions 3, 4, and 5. Woo! I'm Mr. AI, and I'm saying, people, wake up. Guess what? I'm going to give you 3, 4, and 5 really hard next time. But by the way, the people that get it right get 10 points, not 1 point. So, and then the whole like social mechanism piece, I think is just really, really interesting as well.
That's interesting. Yeah, you could definitely design it so that it taps into some more complex sort of dynamics that are tapping more into intrinsics of people.
Yeah, I would just argue that, what's it called? Unconscious incompetence. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And from an intrinsic standpoint, if you don't know something that should be motivating you, or the other way around, if you think something should be motivating you, but it actually has zero worth, how does that affect the machine, right? How does that affect the different algorithms that determine the leaderboards? The other thing too is, this, the leaderboarding mechanism is very interesting because, AI can adjust the scoring levels, but your peers ought to be able to do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets really, really interesting because is a group of learners an extrinsic motivated entity because they're a collective? And because guess what? They're leveraging their own collective intelligence, as they say, even though they're competitors. It kind of sounds like the television show Survival, right? It's like, ooh,
yeah.
I'm gonna gang up on that Mark guy because he's so cocky, whatever. I don't know, he's so arrogant.
Yeah,
I don't know. But I think it's just a really, really fascinating topic because it's, what we're talking about is, the mechanics of instruction.
Mm-hmm.
And we just started. We're in like baby steps of understanding the kitchen mechanics, and then the learning preference or learning journey or learners mechanics. And that's what's really, really exciting about, I think where we're at today from an L&D perspective. And the other thing too, which is really fascinating, is how this, if only we had more time, Vince, but how this affects the operating model, how this affects ways of working. There's all these new, whether they're from the US or China, all these new reasoning models, right? And the thing is, they're all getting significantly better on almost like a daily basis.
Yeah.
I was talking to a buddy the other day, and I was saying, if these reasoning agents get really, really good, and now they're also, because of, RAG or whatever, they're able to tap into other areas of expertise or information or insights or data, whatever. Subject matter experts have always been on this pedestal for instructional designers and learning designers. Oh, how am I going to build that thing? Okay, I got to talk to Susie. I got to talk to John. They're the experts. Well, guess what? This holy grail, I shouldn't say holy grail, but this expectation to only leverage experts, but now these reasoning agents are now becoming just as good. are we going to be in a position where actually, you know what? I guess we don't have to talk to engineering anymore.
Mm.
Oh, I guess product marketing's value proposition for sales folks, it's actually not working, or whatever it might be. That's going to be amazing.
Yeah. That I wish we could talk about it because this is such a important topic around. I think it really challenges the role of humans in the workplace, but we'll pin that. Give me some time. Because if you open that can of worms, like you got to mix your next meeting, Mark.
Well, in some societies and cultures, eating worms in the kitchen or in the dining room is actually, high protein, my man. It's just
yeah, it's true. It's true. In Korea, we kind of.
And then you get the real crunchy, salty ones. Woo!
That's right. But anyways, thanks for getting together with me today and talk through these things. Very provocative thinking around where L&D could go. And anyways, looking forward to continuing the conversation with you, whether on the show or separately.
Sounds good. Once again, I really appreciate the invite. Thank you again.
Thanks, Mark.